Imagine the lights are off. A soft light falls on an old map of Iran. I'm sitting in front of the camera and I say, today we're going to talk about the things that got lost between the lines of history books. Not the version we memorized in school, not the dry and official narrative. We're going after the secrets about Iran that history has hidden. History is never told in a perfectly clean and organized way. Usually the winners write the story. But Iran, this ancient land, has seen so many rises and falls that many of its stories were either censored, simplified, or never fully told. Let's go back to the glory of antiquity. We've all heard about the greatness of the Achaemenid Empire, about Cyrus, Darius, Persepolis, advanced administration, and respect for different cultures. But what's talked about less is that this massive empire was never completely calm or united from within. Local rebellions, family rivalries, economic pressure from constant wars. These are usually summarized in a few lines, while behind each one there was real human drama, people caught between loyalty and survival. Now let's move a few centuries forward. One of the darkest turning points in Iranian history was the fall of the Sasanian order. Many people have heard the name Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, a decisive battle, but textbooks rarely talk about the atmosphere among ordinary people at that time. The fear moving from city to city, the confusion of soldiers who hadn't been paid for months, a royal court more busy with internal conspiracies than the external enemy. The collapse wasn't just the result of swords, it was also the result of internal erosion. That's the part we rarely face, because it's easier to blame everything on a single war. A few centuries later, the Mongol invasion swept in from the east like a storm. The Mongol invasion of Khwarezmia is always associated with destruction and bloodshed. But behind that dark image lies another secret: reconstruction. What's rarely emphasized is how Iran stood up again after that catastrophe. How culture, art, architecture, and even administrative systems were reborn. History often paints things as either completely black or completely white. But reality is gray. The people of this land fell many times, yet each time they rebuilt themselves in a new form. Let's move closer to modern times. When we talk about the Qajar era, the image that usually comes to mind is backwardness, concessions, and political weakness. But we don't talk enough about the fact that Iran was trapped in the dangerous rivalry of global powers. The competition between United Kingdom and Russia had practically turned Iran into a chessboard. Decisions that we judge easily today may have been seen then as the only way to avoid total collapse. History, when told from a safe distance, quickly labels heroes and traitors. But when you're standing inside the storm, those lines are much more blurred. And then we reach the 20th century. We've heard a lot about the nationalization of oil and the role of Mohammad Mossadegh. We've heard about the 1953 coup. But what's less discussed is the deep social fracture of that period. Iran wasn't simply divided into supporters and opponents. Different layers of society had different fears and hopes. Some wanted economic independence. Some feared instability. Some just wanted a normal life. When we look back, we're tempted to simplify everything. But reality was far more complex. One of the biggest secrets of Iran's history is exactly this complexity. No era was entirely golden or entirely dark. Even the periods remembered as glorious were full of hidden crises. And even the periods remembered as collapse contained the seeds of renewal. As a YouTuber, when I talk about this topic, I don't just want to list events. I want to build images. Imagine walking through the streets of an ancient city. You hear the market noise. News spreads that an enemy army is approaching. People are divided, stay or flee. Or imagine standing in Tehran 100 years ago, hearing whispers about political agreements spreading from mouth to mouth. History isn't just the names of kings and the dates of wars, it's the anxiety and hope of ordinary people. Maybe one of the greatest secrets history has hidden is that Iran was never just a stage where events happened. It has been one of the main actors in regional and even global history. From ancient trade routes to modern energy rivalries, this land has always been at the center of transformation. Yet some narratives are written as if Iran only reacted, never shaped events itself. There's another secret: cultural resilience. Even when governments changed, even when official languages shifted, even when power structures collapsed, a deep cultural identity survived. Poetry, architecture, Nowruz, the Persian language. These aren't things that disappear with one invasion or one political agreement. Textbooks may focus on politics, but the soul of a nation is found in its culture. Now the big question: why do some things remain hidden? It's not always about conspiracy. Sometimes it's about simplicity. A school textbook has to be short, so details are cut. Sometimes politics plays a role. Every era prefers to highlight certain parts of the past and dim others. That means if we truly want to understand history, we need more than one source, more than one narrative. When I make this video, my goal isn't to replace one official story with another ultimate truth. My goal is to make you think. To make sure that when you hear the name of a historical period, a single flat image doesn't form in your mind. To remind you that behind every event, there are dozens of hidden angles. The secrets of Iran's history aren't necessarily classified documents hidden underground. Many of them were always right in front of us. We just didn't look deeply enough. Like the simple reality that empires rise and fall, but the people living on this land remain. In the end, they are the ones who create the real history. Maybe it's time to see history not as something to memorize, but as a living story, a story that is still unfolding. And maybe the greatest secret history has hidden is that the future, just like the past, is full of layers waiting to be uncovered by those who dare to ask questions. And that's exactly what we're doing here. Asking questions, looking deeper, and trying to see the human beings behind the official narratives. Because until you see the people, you haven't truly understood history. Would you like me to help you brainstorm some visual cues or B-roll ideas to go along with this script? If part 1 felt like standing at the edge of history, watching a king slowly realize the ground beneath him was collapsing, then part 2 is the moment he actually steps off that ground. By the time the final days approached, the atmosphere inside the palace was no longer royal. It was tense, heavy, almost suffocating. The man who once stood at the center of grand military parades and international diplomacy was now surrounded by whispers, uncertainty, and the echo of protests growing louder beyond the palace walls. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was not just facing political opposition anymore. He was facing something far more dangerous, a loss of control over the narrative. For decades, he had carefully shaped the image of a modern, powerful Iran. Skyscrapers rose, oil money flowed, the military expanded, and Western alliances strengthened, especially with the United States. But on the streets, another story was being written. And that story was angry. The protests were no longer scattered. They were organized, emotional, and fueled by a mixture of religious passion, economic frustration, and political resentment. Cassette tapes carrying the speeches of Ruhollah Khomeini were circulating hand to hand, played inside homes, mosques, and markets. His voice traveled faster than the government could suppress it. Every speech felt like a spark landing on dry grass. Inside the palace, meetings became longer and more desperate. Advisors debated strategies, crack down harder or compromise. Reform or resist. Martial law had already been declared in parts of the country. Blood had already been spilled. But instead of silencing the uprising, it seemed to intensify it. Imagine the psychological weight of that moment. A ruler who once commanded absolute authority now questioning every decision. Every order carried risk. Every delay carried danger. There are accounts describing how exhausted he looked in those final weeks. Physically thinner, emotionally drained. Illness had already weakened him privately, though the public knew little. Leadership under pressure is one thing. Leadership while battling serious health issues is another. The isolation must have been immense. Who do you truly trust when an entire nation feels like it's slipping away? Meanwhile, the streets were transforming into something almost cinematic. Massive demonstrations, black banners, crowds chanting in unison, soldiers standing uncertainly, sometimes unsure whether to fire or to step back. The loyalty of the armed forces, once the Shah's strongest pillar, was beginning to crack. And when the military hesitates, power shifts. Foreign governments were watching carefully. Washington calculated its options. European leaders weighed stability against morality. The Shah had long positioned himself as a strategic ally in the Cold War chessboard. But geopolitics is cold by nature. Support can become conditional very quickly. At some point, the conversations inside the palace shifted from, "How do we stop this?" to, "What happens if we can't?" That shift changes everything. January approached. The decision that once felt unthinkable was now on the table: leaving Iran. Not permanently, at least not in theory. Officially, it would be described as a temporary departure, a vacation, a pause, a way to calm tensions. But deep down, many understood what it really meant. On January 16, 1979, the departure happened. The image is unforgettable. The Shah and Empress Farah boarding the airplane. A final wave. A nation holding its breath. For some, it was a moment of grief. For others, a moment of triumph. For many, it was uncertainty, pure and raw. When that plane lifted off, it didn't just carry a monarch. It carried an entire era with it. Power vacuums are dangerous. Within weeks, Ruhollah Khomeini would return to Iran to a reception that felt almost mythic in scale. Millions flooded the streets. The symbolism was overwhelming. One leader leaving quietly, another arriving to thunderous crowds. History rarely offers clean endings. It offers transitions. For the Shah, exile became a long and painful chapter. From country to country, searching for refuge, facing political complications everywhere he went. The illness that had been kept quiet grew worse. The former ruler of a powerful nation, now dependent on the hospitality of others. It's a dramatic reversal that almost feels fictional, yet it was very real. There's something deeply human in that fall. Strip away ideology for a moment, strip away politics, and you're left with a man who once believed he could control destiny, now confronting the limits of power. And that's what makes this story timeless. It's not just about Iran. It's about leadership under pressure. It's about what happens when modernization moves faster than cultural consensus. It's about the fragile balance between authority and legitimacy. When people feel unheard long enough, momentum builds. And when momentum becomes mass movement, even the strongest systems can shake. Looking back, some argue it could have been avoided with deeper reforms earlier. Others say the forces were already too powerful by the late 1970s. Historians still debate it. Political analysts still dissect it. But one thing is undeniable. Those final weeks reshaped not only Iran's future, but the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. And maybe the most haunting part of all this is the silence that follows departure. The palace rooms once filled with strategy meetings suddenly empty. The echo of footsteps fades. Flags change. Portraits come down. Symbols shift. A new chapter begins, not smoothly, not peacefully, but decisively. Part 1 was about tension building. Part 2 is about irreversible change. And if there's one lesson history whispers through this story, it's this. Power is never permanent. It feels solid, until suddenly, it isn't. Would you like me to translate this into any other language? Or perhaps help you with a concluding segment for your video?